In 1955, General Motors sold exactly 700 units of a car that would go on to become the single most famous American performance nameplate in history. 700 cars in an entire model year for a company that routinely sold hundreds of thousands of vehicles without much effort at all. Executives inside General Motors were already discussing the car's cancellation. A rival division was quietly lobbying to replace it entirely with a completely different sports car of its own. And the only reason any of us have ever heard the word Corvette today comes down to a handful of decisions made under enormous pressure in the span of about 18 months. This isn't a countdown of 10 cars from a single year. This is a story of how America's most legendary sports car very nearly never made it past its third model year at all. This is a story of a car born almost by accident, nearly killed by its own underwhelming engine, humiliated by a rival that outsold it 23-1, and saved, in the end, by a combination of a stubborn engineer, a lucky corporate timing coincidence, and a group of accountants who, for possibly the only time in the company's entire history, made exactly the right call. By the time this episode is over, you'll understand exactly how close the Corvette came to disappearing before it ever got the chance to become the car this entire genre of American performance ultimately measures itself against. The Corvette story begins with an idea that almost wasn't meant to go anywhere at all. Chevrolet's original plans for the car didn't even include a full production model. It was conceived purely as a concept, built to appear at the 1953 General Motors Motorama Auto Show in New York. One flashy dream car among many designed to generate headlines and showroom foot traffic, not necessarily to actually reach customers. Public reaction at that Motorama show was strong enough that GM's leadership, under design chief Harley Earl, greenlit a limited production run. Underneath its genuinely striking fiberglass body, though, sat a considerably less impressive engine, Chevrolet's existing Blue Flame inline-six, modified with triple side-draft carburetors to produce 150 horsepower, mated exclusively to a two-speed Power Glide automatic transmission. It looked like a genuine sports car. It didn't drive anything close to like one. The gap between the Corvette's styling and its actual performance became a real problem almost immediately. Enthusiasts who took one look at the car's low, sleek fiberglass body expected genuine sports car dynamics to match: a manual transmission, sharp handling, and real acceleration. Instead, they got a straight-six engine borrowed largely from Chevrolet's ordinary passenger car lineup, paired exclusively with the automatic transmission that offered no manual option whatsoever for the car's first two model years. Road testers of the era were polite, but unmistakably underwhelmed, and word spread quickly through the small, passionate American sports car community that the Corvette, for all its visual promise, simply wasn't the real thing mechanically. Chevrolet built 300 units for 1953, all hand-assembled, all painted polo white with a red interior. It was a promising beginning that immediately started running into trouble. For 1954, Chevrolet made only minor mechanical tweaks to the Corvette, but did make one significant change, cutting the price by roughly 20%, down to just under $2,800, specifically to try attracting younger, more budget-conscious buyers into the fold. It wasn't enough. Chevrolet built 3,640 Corvettes for the 1954 model year, but a meaningful number of those cars sat unsold on dealer lots well into the following year, a genuinely worrying sign for a company used to moving inventory quickly. By comparison, Cadillac's hand-built, considerably more expensive Eldorado convertible had sold 2,150 units that same year at more than double the price. Proof that the Corvette's sales struggles weren't simply about affordability. Something more fundamental about the car itself wasn't connecting with the buyers Chevrolet needed to reach. In September of 1954, the first 1955 Ford Thunderbirds began rolling off the assembly line at Ford's Dearborn plant, and everything about the Corvette's already shaky position got considerably worse overnight. The Thunderbird offered a 292 cubic inch Y-block V8, producing nearly 200 horsepower, a genuine 3-speed manual transmission with an available overdrive option, and the level of comfort and civility, power steering, power brakes, roll-up windows, that made the considerably more Spartan Corvette feel almost primitive by comparison. Ford had built a genuinely appealing personal sports car, arriving at the exact moment the Corvette's own reputation was already struggling. It's difficult to overstate just how directly this new rival threatened everything Chevrolet had been trying to build. Chevrolet did make one genuinely important improvement for the 1955 model year, adding its brand new 265 cubic inch small block V8 as an option, producing 195 horsepower, and finally giving the Corvette a genuine performance engine to match its sporty looks. It should have been the turnaround moment the car desperately needed. It wasn't, at least not immediately, because dealers still had unsold 1954 inventory sitting on their lots. Chevrolet deliberately limited 1955 production to just 700 units, an 81% collapse from the year before. Reportedly, as few as 6 of those 700 cars were even built with the outgoing 6-cylinder engine, meaning almost every Corvette sold that year carried the new V8. It still wasn't nearly enough. The Ford Thunderbird, in its own debut model year, sold 16,155 units, outselling the Corvette by a margin of roughly 23-1. It was, by any measure, a genuine humiliating defeat. Here's the part of this story most Corvette fans have never heard. The man most responsible for creating the Corvette in the first place, design chief Harley Earl, spent part of this exact same period quietly pushing to replace it with an entirely different GM sports car. As the disappointing 1954 sales figures were coming in, Earl grew increasingly worried the Corvette simply couldn't compete with what Ford was about to unleash, and he began championing a considerably more advanced alternative developed under the Oldsmobile brand, the F-88, featuring a genuinely potent 270 horsepower V8, along with power steering, power brakes, electric roll-up windows and top, and Oldsmobile's 4-speed hydromatic automatic, everything the Spartan early Corvette lacked. For a genuine moment, GM's own design leadership seriously debated whether Oldsmobile's F-88 concept, not Chevrolet's struggling two-seater, should become the corporation's flagship American sports car going forward. In what might be the single strangest twist in this entire story, the Corvette wasn't ultimately saved by brilliant engineering or a passionate rescue campaign. It was saved by General Motors' own bean counters, making the cheaper, lazier corporate decision almost by default. The Corvette was already in production, already receiving approved engineering upgrades, and GM's accountants determined there simply wasn't room in the lineup or budget justification for 2 separate GM sports cars competing directly against each other for the exact same narrow slice of the market. Between an unproven, considerably more expensive Oldsmobile concept car and an existing Chevrolet model that just needed further development, the financially conservative choice won out. The Oldsmobile F-88 never reached production. The Corvette, saved essentially by corporate cost-cutting logic rather than any grand vision, got to keep fighting for its survival. While GM's accountants were making their pragmatic calculations, one engineer inside Chevrolet's own ranks had already been working, largely on his own initiative, to prove the Corvette could genuinely compete. Zora Arkus Duntov, a Belgian-born engineer and former European road racer who had joined Chevrolet specifically because he believed in the car's unrealized potential. Duntov had already built an experimental test mule, known internally as the EX87, fitting it with the very same small block V8 that would eventually become the Corvette's standard 1955 engine, the first Corvette of any kind to receive V8 power. Beyond simply adding horsepower, Duntov worked extensively to improve the car's handling and overall dynamics, determined to close the gap between the Corvette's sporty looks and its actual on-road capability. In 1955, a Corvette prepared under Duntov's guidance, driven by NASCAR legend Buck Baker, ran competitively at Daytona's Flying Mile, giving the struggling car its first genuine taste of real motorsport credibility. It's worth being honest about exactly why the 1955 Corvette's new V8 engine, as significant as it genuinely was, didn't immediately turn the car's sales fortunes around. The problem wasn't really the engine itself, it was everything still surrounding it. The Corvette in 1955 still lacked roll-up windows, still offered a comparatively Spartan interior, and still carried a reputation built up over its rocky first two model years that plenty of potential buyers simply hadn't forgotten yet. Adding a genuinely strong V8 engine was a necessary first step, but Chevrolet still needed to fix the rest of the car before buyers would give it a genuinely fair second look, especially with the considerably more polished, considerably better equipped Thunderbird sitting right there as an alternative. Chevrolet spent the following two model years, 1956 and 1957, systematically fixing exactly what had been holding the Corvette back. The 1956 redesign finally added roll-up side windows, an optional power convertible top, an optional removable hardtop, and considerably more modern integrated styling that moved well past the original 1953 concept car's dated first impression. Under the hood, the small block V8 grew stronger too, with the standard 265 cubic inch engine now producing 210 horsepower, and a genuinely serious dual four-barrel option pushing output to 225 horsepower, numbers that finally gave the Corvette real, honest performance credentials to match its sporty looks. For 1957, Chevrolet went even further, introducing the legendary Rochester mechanical fuel injection option, an engineering achievement genuinely years ahead of most of its competition, and one that would define the Corvette's reputation for cutting-edge performance for the rest of the decade. Sales climbed steadily once those changes reached the market, and by the time this channel's regular episodes pick up the Corvette story in the late 1950s and throughout the 1960s, the car that had once nearly gotten replaced by an Oldsmobile concept car had transformed into America's flagship performance nameplate. Eventually, the platform for legendary engines like the fuel-injected 283, the 427 big blocks, and the L-88, all of which this entire series has already told you the story of in previous episodes. None of those later legends would exist at all if a handful of decisions, made under genuine financial and competitive pressure between 1954 and 1956, had gone even slightly differently. It's worth sitting with exactly what would have disappeared from American automotive history had General Motors accountants made a different call, or had Zora Arkus Duntov never bothered pushing so hard for the small block V8's inclusion in the first place. Every big block Corvette this series has already celebrated, the L-88, the LS6, the canceled before production LS7, every Corvette victory at Le Mans and Sebring, and the entire 70-year lineage of America's most recognized sports car nameplate, all traces directly back to a car that sold just 700 units in 1955, sitting on the very edge of cancellation, saved as much by corporate accounting logic as by any grand engineering vision. So what does this entire story actually prove? That even the most legendary, most instantly recognizable names in American automotive history often survive their earliest years by the thinnest possible margin, not through some inevitable march towards greatness, but through a genuinely uncertain, genuinely close sequence of decisions that could easily have gone the other way. A rival division's cheaper concept car could have replaced the Corvette entirely. A slightly different set of sales figures could have given GM's accountants exactly the excuse they needed to simply let the whole project quietly die. Instead, one stubborn engineer's belief in an underperforming sports car, combined with a fortunate act of corporate cost-cutting and a genuinely humiliating defeat at the hands of the Ford Thunderbird that forced Chevrolet to finally take the car seriously, all came together at exactly the right moment. The fastest, most legendary American sports car of the entire golden age very nearly never made it past its third model year at all, and every single Corvette built in the 7 decades since owes its existence to a handful of people who simply refused to let that happen. Did you know the Corvette came this close to being replaced by an Oldsmobile sports car before it ever became an American legend? Or is this the first time you're hearing just how close it came to disappearing? Did your father, your uncle, or a neighbor on your street ever own one of these early struggling first generation Corvettes? Write the story in the comments below.